Hey folks, and welcome. We're going to be talking today about dogs who plant and freeze on leash and stare at triggers like people, dogs, animals, etc. And this is all part of Managing Reactivity Month at CCA, so we're sensitive dog experts. We coach guardians who have sensitive dogs with big feelings. We help you heal their reactive behaviors and we help you build a better relationship. And today we're really diving into this topic of dogs that freeze and plant on leash. It was one of the most asked questions when people were signing up for our webinar this month. So tomorrow I'm hosting a over an hour event all about managing reactivity. So I'd love to see folks there. And when people sign up, they can ask me a question. And this was the most asked question. It's what do I do when my dog is staring and fixating on something and I can't get them to disengage? And so there are lots of different versions of this question, but in general, it's a perfect topic for this month of managing reactive behaviors, because when we see these unwanted behaviors propping up, that's an opportunity for them to be rehearsed and strengthened. So this month, we're really talking about, we're doing an audit basically of all of our dogs' behaviors, and we're going, okay, which ones are still kind of problematic? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So let's dive into the problem. So lots of people talked about their dogs fixating on triggers on walks, and they can't move them away. They're like kind of trying, and the dogs are pulling and saying, no, I won't move. And in some cases, the triggers are coming closer or moving, and then the dog's exploding. Or in other cases, the human's trying to move the dog away, and then the dog explodes because of the human's intervention on their watching. So someone's saying, my Doberman freezes. Absolutely. Yes. And my dog used to do this too. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And first of all, before we dive into this, we have to think about what our goal is here. And I talk about this all the time, but there are different motivations behind reactivity in dogs. And reactivity just would mean any overreaction. But usually we're looking at this staring, barking, lunging, really difficult to kind of reach them in those moments. They're in this really heightened emotional state. And the emotional state that they're in, it often depends on what the motivation is for their behavior. So some dogs will stare at a dog, and it's because they want to go and say hi, and they won't move because they know that there's a chance they might be able to go and play with that dog. The motivation for that dog is to get towards the dog, to acquire something. They want to get to something. Other cases of reactivity are motivated by dogs who want to actually get away from something. They want to avoid something. And so my dog Hera had a lot of avoidance-based reactivity. And it's a lot of our dogs that in the questions, this was what was happening. They were staring, and then the dog would get closer, or the person would get closer, and they'd be yelling, yelling, yelling. Our goal, regardless of what the motivation is to stop the dog rehearsing these behaviors, number one. So we're trying to avoid reactions. And I think that's something lots of people know, right? Like, let me know. Have you heard that if you have a reactive dog, you should try to avoid them having big reactions? That's quite common knowledge. Now, with our super sensitive dogs, we have to take this to the next step. We're not just trying to avoid outward reactions. We're also trying to avoid internal experiences that might negatively impact their behavior in the long run. So it's not just about the external behavior. It's also about the internal experience. And what I find is that a lot of these dogs are watching their triggers, and they're not lunging and barking and screaming, but they are worrying. They are ruminating. Their bodies look tense. And I often have folks come to me and they've reduced big explosive reactions, and they go, well, they're only reacting, once a week, twice a week. I'm really working hard to reduce these reactions. And I look at their week and I go, yeah, they're not yelling anymore, but they're still worrying. They're still spending most of their walk thinking about the dogs and the people and the triggers that are upsetting them. And so when we're thinking about what do we do when our dog is freezing on a lead, looking at a trigger, we're not just thinking about avoiding the big, bad, lungy, barky behaviors. I'm thinking, and I know from experience now, that allowing them to ruminate and stare and worry and fixate is also not going to be helpful. So our goal is to manage external and internal reactions, external reactions, internal experience of the dog. And I think there are like two big ways that we can address this. And I'm obviously, this is going to be like a 15-minute live. Please come to the long webinar tomorrow or sign up and I'll send you the recording if you're watching this after the fact and you can get a lot more detail about this. But in general, number one, I think the first thing we can do is we can go, okay, what changes can we make to the walk? Just from the beginning, before we've even had a reaction, what changes can we make? Reducing the amount of walks sometimes is helpful. Rethinking where we're walking the dog, when we're walking the dog, the time of day, etc. So for example, my dog Hira used to be really reactive to people and dogs. People, he's completely amazing. With dogs, he still can get worried sometimes because he's been attacked a bunch of times and it still happens intermittently. So of course he's a bit worried. And I took him to the park across the road tonight. It was 6 p.m. in London and we were there for 20 minutes and I was like, hell fucking no. Nope. We're not going to be here at this time because there were too many crazy dogs that were out of control and it was not safe for him. He wasn't having any reactions. He was just worried. He was looking. He was trying to relax, but then he was getting worried and vigilant to the dogs around him. We need to manage their exposure to environments where they are going to be pushed to reactivity. Yes, we also need to manage their exposure to environments and scenarios where they'll be pushed to worry, to ruminate, to fixate, to be hypervigilant. That's like the internalization of all of this, right? And we need to treat the whole dog, not just the big bad external reactions. And so for these dogs who are like freezing on walks, I'm wondering, if you're living in a busy suburb, you might be walking your dog at the quietest times of day. You might be going for short walks rather than hour-long walks, half an hour-long walks. Instead of 1 hour-long walk, 3 20-minute walks throughout the day. There are lots of things we can do to help reduce the risk of these dogs having what we call experiences that lead to behavior injury. And behavior injury means that the behavior is going to get worse. So if my dog Hero was across the road at a park, say he got like rushed at by a big dog and it scared him, he will be more vigilant the next day. We are avoiding those things. If he was barked at by a dog, he might also be more vigilant. So I'm being mindful of all the things that cause his behavior to suffer, and I'm reducing his exposure to all of them. So thinking about reducing walks, rethinking where we're walking, etc., the time of day, all of this stuff, very, very important. And we have to be pretty vigilant. Often we have to be really consistent because, especially if the behavior is rehearsed a lot, it's been heavily reinforced. So your dog has learned that they see something on a walk and they freeze and they worry about it and they worry about it and then they go, get away from me, and then they're safe and it keeps them safe. And it looks to us like a bit weird. We're like, why, if you're uncomfortable, if the motivation is avoidance and you're scared, or if you're uncomfortable, why don't you just move away? And when I'm nervous about something, I also sometimes worry about that thing. If I'm nervous about something to do with politics, I will doom scroll on my phone and worry and be vigilant about that thing. It's actually not that abnormal. And so when we think about our dog's behaviors, we can think about it the same way. They are doom scrolling on Instagram, and it's not helpful for them because they're looking for things that are going to cause them upset, right? We've got some questions in the chat. I'm going to answer them in a second. I want to talk a little bit about the second part of this. And of course, this is just the answer to the question of how to respond to the freeze, right? This is not a full training plan. But once we've reduced the amount that they're walking or the amount that they're seeing these triggers, and we've reduced the worry, we can start thinking about, okay, we need a new response. We need a new plan. And when you work with us, we have like first steps for all of our clients. And on walks, the first step is usually to rethink or reduce walks if needed. And then we start to teach our dogs that when they see things in the environment that are distracting, upsetting, exciting, they turn around, they move away, and they come with me away from that situation. And people call it flight training often. And it basically is the skill of moving away, disengaging and moving away from something and then recovering. We create rituals with our dogs where we rehearse to a very high level. In the lots of the questions I was asked, people said that when they tried to move their dog away from triggers, their dogs would explode. And that's often because the tension on the lead, the pressure of you intervening in the situation can tip them over the edge. And often they've also had past experiences that associate all of these different stimulus with various things. So it's all a bit messy, isn't it? And often we try to move them away and then they're like, oh, I'm going to get you, right? That's often what happens. We need to change that. We need your dog and you to practice shifting out of engagement with something and moving away to a distance. And we teach that usually a verbal cue or a tactile cue or both, actually. So usually my flight cues with my dogs are a pressure on the lead, a little bit of pressure on the lead maybe, if it's appropriate for the dog, and then I go something like quick, or like let's go, or something like that. I've had clients whose flight cue is shit, whatever it is that you need to do. It could be their name, it could be whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. For some dogs, it will be important that we add leash pressure as part of the cue, because lots of dogs find it unpleasant, find it uncomfortable, find it stressful. It's associated with something really negative, a negative experience. So we'll sometimes have to build that in. And it's way more than I can talk about in an Instagram live. But what I do want to tell you is we get dogs who used to see a trigger and then fixated and stared. And if you tried to pull them away, they either fight you or they explode. We take them from that to they see something in the distance and almost, actually in most cases, eventually automatically turn around and move away with you. And it's not just moving off the side of the road and watching the trigger pass. No. In most cases, we're moving them completely out of sight and we are managing them, often maybe with food, maybe physically, maybe with social support. By managing them, what I mean is that we don't let them kind of go back over their shoulder and worry 1,000 times. So the importance of building that skill outside of the stressful scenario cannot be stressed enough. We need to practice that skill. And you can look up flight training. You can join us in the webinar tomorrow to learn about the first steps. You can join the membership to actually send me videos of you working on this with your dogs and get feedback. But what I want to explain to you guys is that we can teach pressure and you saying, let's go, as something that is almost reflexive, like they're just there with you really quickly. To do that, we have to stop putting them in the position where they continuously practice the freeze over and over again. And then we need to start away from triggers and we need to use, probably food and toys and things like that to build that skill for them. There's a few things at the end of this live that I want to chat about, which is what we don't want to be doing in the moments when our dogs are fixated and staring or about to pop off at something. Now, a lot of management techniques have become popularized recently, which is fantastic, but I see so many people throwing food at this problem. The dog is at the end of the lead. They are staring at another dog or a person or a child, and that stare is a threat. They're saying, don't you dare come any closer. I will get you. And then people are bringing cookies to their face and trying to get them to eat and trying to get them to lure them away with the cookies. I personally think, one, you're either going to get bit, or two, you're going to massively mess up that dog's relationship with food, I think. I personally have found that to be really unhelpful. In fact, lots of dogs will stop eating or become less confident eating if in high pressure situations we try to shove food in their face. I also see people repeating themselves or trying to negotiate with the dog. So if my poodle here, who has had aggressive responses to dogs and has, he has been a bit of a menace to society, I'm not going to lie, before I understood what to do. If he's staring at a dog across the street and he's going, or something like that, I am absolutely not going to go, Hira, can you come with me, please? Hira, touch. Hira, do you want a cookie? No. You're threatening someone in the street, mate. That's not acceptable. I'm not going to hurt you or scare you, but also I'm not going to negotiate with you at a totally inappropriate time. Imagine if another person or a kid was threatening another one and someone kind of was like, well, how do you want to please come over here? No, you would, please don't do that. You're not allowed to do that. That's not okay. And I want us all to think about reactivity as a systemic issue. It's not about you, the individual, and your dog. If your dog is giving another dog threats across the street, what do you think is going to happen? the cycle continues of violence between these animals. We need to not allow them to threaten each other. And so I don't negotiate with dogs in that time. I don't bring food to their face. If I have a cue that I can use, like a flight ritual that I've rehearsed, I'll use that ritual. Brilliant. I don't want to stress them out more. But if I'm not prepared for the moment and it happens because of just an accident, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time and it happens, I'm going to physically move them out of that situation. So that's why I always want to have them on a piece of really comfortable equipment, usually a harness or a collar that's very, very safe and comfortable, because sometimes if you have a reactive dog, you are going to have to physically move them out of a situation for the safety of everyone else in your community. If there's no direct threat, like if your dog's barking at like a sculpture, it's not as big a deal. But if your dog is threatening other people, potentially scaring people in the environment, to me, it's not appropriate to negotiate that with them. It's not appropriate to kind of let them just threaten each other. In the worst case scenarios, we get them out of there. We get them out there as quickly as we can. And we don't let our dogs threaten each other. And I've had people question me about this, being like, will you make the reactivity worse by moving them away? Potentially. With the wrong dog, absolutely. Yeah. And that's why we're not putting them in these situations over and over again. We can't just put them in situations where they react and then just let them react and let them threaten everyone and be like, well, I can't intervene because that would upset them. No, we don't do that. There's one last thing here, which is what not to do. So we've talked about, we have to rethink how much we're exposing them to these things in the first place. We need to teach them a new response to that trigger, which is this flight ritual. Someone asked actually earlier a really great question, which is, can you talk about the difference between worrying about a trigger, watching and worrying, and watching and habituating? So if we want our dogs to get better and feel better about dogs and people and all that stuff, at some point in the treatment plan, we might reintroduce watching triggers so that they can learn more about them, gather information, build social bonds with people and dogs, etc. If your dog is freezing on leash, you are not in an appropriate place to be doing any therapy work. Before therapy work and trigger watching happens, we need to get them to the point where they are relatively neutral. They need to be not freezing. They need to be not reacting. And then we can have a conversation with them about that trigger after the fact. I used to think that I could just go out with my dog who was reacting every day to stuff and had big feelings, and I could just start letting him watch dogs, letting him watch people, letting him watch squirrels, giving him cookies, engage, disengage, look at that. If you've heard of any of these games, that's what I did at the beginning, and it's what hundreds of my clients do at the beginning. But if the dog doesn't have a holistic wellness foundation set up, if you haven't done the first steps, if you just get your dog out and start watching triggers, guess what happens? It gets worse. You teach them to worry. You teach them to ruminate. They need to be easily able to disengage. They need to be not vigilant. They need to be not ruminating before we can start to engage with them about these triggers. And what that means is they need like a baseline of nervous system regulation, feelings of safety, an attunement with their guardians, health checks, all of these different things that need to be put in place. So if you guys are working with your dogs on reactivity and they are reacting to triggers on walks, whether that be freezing or full-blown reactions, most likely you're not in a place where you can have them be watching triggers. And if you are trying to have them watch triggers and sometimes they're popping off, or they're watching but they won't really eat, or they'll eat treats quickly and then they'll go back to staring, it's very high likelihood that you're actually making this much worse. And so again, I go back to the beginning. What is the goal? The goal is that there's no external reaction, and the goal is that there's no worry and anxiety and rumination in their head that actually is making it worse. So you're right, Barney, who asked the question, Barney the BC. At some point in the process, we might be reintroducing watching triggers. And that's what I do with my clients every day. That's my whole job, is I coach people in how to actually do this therapy with their dogs, how to watch triggers from afar and have that be therapeutic. But before we can get there, we need to build a foundation of managing their day-to-day experiences so that we're not consistently resensitizing them. And I think the majority of dogs who are getting on the floor and staring and at triggers when on walks, even if they're not having big reactions, I still think they're rehearsing internally and externally the wrong set of behaviors and the kind of learning the wrong lessons, basically. All right, I've got some off-topic questions, so I'm not going to answer those. Thank you for the lovely feedback, folks. Oh, thank you guys. Oh yeah, I love free stuff. You know how it works. I love to tell you guys everything I can for free. And speaking of that, we have the webinar tomorrow, so you guys can comment. What's the word? React 2025. Comment React 2025, one word. And I will send you the sign up link. If you can't make the live webinar, I will send the recording out to everybody. And I would love to see you guys there. I can get some questions answered. We can talk a lot more in depth, and we can actually look at how we start training things like a flight cue for these dogs who are really having a hard time with triggers on walks. All right. Thank you everyone for listening. I'll speak to you guys soon. Hopefully see you at the free event tomorrow. And yeah, thanks guys. See ya.